All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you all to the next edition of our Java with Joe morning coffee series. So we do this every fourth Thursday of the month, January through October, because let's face it, nobody wants to be here on Thanksgiving or right around Christmas, so that's why, it's still my heart. But so this is actually, we got one more this year, so this is our second to last for the year. I almost got ahead of myself there. So we're very happy to have Bernida Scoins and Charlie Boyd here. We're going to talk about maybe our most famous author, no offense, Bill, from Genesee County. Yeah, we'll see. He's got time to catch up and surpass. So, John Gardner. So, guys, take it away.
Okay. I'm Bernida Scoins. I'm the town of Batavia historian. I also work here at the Peace Garden. We sell hot dogs over here during the summer for the Peace Garden. I was at Genesee Community College. That's where Charlie Boyd, we started the John Gardner Society, and as the secretary, I kind of got the job keeping it organized. And just recently, Charlie went by my house and we decided that the John Gardner was at the college behind locked doors and nobody could get to him. So Charlie went to the dean, and then the dean went to the board, and they approved the town of Batavia to have it. And it is there for anyone that wants to come over there. I have lots of books if you want to start reading them. I'm at the town of Batavia on Federal Drive temporarily. And you just come over there, and I'll be glad to sign out a book if you want to read one, and go from there.
Wednesday mornings.
Wednesday mornings from 7 to noon. So I'm an early riser. I want to introduce Professor Emeritus Charlie Boyd. He is a professor of English at Genesee Community College for the year 1988 to 2018. We work closely with the John Gardner stuff. And Charlie, of course, is the charter member of the John Gardner Society. John Gardner had siblings of Jim, Gilbert, and Sandy. And Gilbert was, I believe, 6 years old when he was killed in a farm accident. So the rest is Charlie.
Well, first of all, I don't really mean this to be a lecture or anything like that. I'm looking for questions, discussion. I am not a Gardner expert. Actually, Bill has a great book, and there's this wonderful chapter on Gardner. So if you want to know wonderful telling of the stories, I would really suggest Tales from the Locked Office Gazette. Dispatches. I was doing tales.
I made a lot of that stuff up anyway.
But I believed every word. Anyway, my interest in John Gardner, actually, to be honest, my interest in Gardner started in grad school in Emporia, Kansas. And as part of my graduate school reading, Grendel was assigned. And that was probably at that time his best known work, and it still seems to be the enduring book that appeals to medievalists, anybody interested in Beowulf, but also in fantasy. There's a dragon type creature. Anyway, that was my first exposure, but the school had a lit week every year. And for lit week, one year they brought in this guy, John Gardner. And John Gardner was this larger than life. I wasn't taking the creative writing class with my friend Steve was. And Steve actually was in the classroom with John Gardner, who did not talk about his books and all that for lengthy periods of time. He worked with the writers. he actually asked Steve, let's see if I can find it, don't need to find that. He actually, after reading Steve's poem that he liked, ended up saying, you should work with short story. You have good detail here, you can really fill that out, and you really should work with that. Please contact me through my publisher. And this was not atypical, I found out at Gardner. When he saw something that somebody has written, he began nurturing it. That was very cool. Anyway, I saw Gardner that evening, not in the classroom, but it was outside one of the local bars, and somebody had a motorcycle, and I saw him come out of the bar with a beer in his hand. It's illegal in Kansas at that time to have done anything like that. With a beer in his hand, gave it to somebody. Somebody had loaned him the keys to the motorcycle. He took off down the highway. So that was my introduction to John Gardner. I was hired here in 1988. Now, if you have been through the Midwest, you'll notice almost every little small town you see that has a famous person from there. Sauk Center, Minnesota. How many of you have heard of that?
I've been there.
Yeah, okay. But it is the birthplace of Sinclair Lewis. And many of us, part of our high school curriculum, maybe in our pastime, read something like, get to the town, wow, birthplace of, home of, everything. Drive through a little town in Indiana, and it's, wasn't he, Ernie Pyle, a World War II correspondent, birthplace of. Okay. So I get to Batavia, and Steve Perry, still a good friend, says, you know, that's the birthplace of John Gardner. I said, I didn't know that at all. And after I'd been here for about 10 years, we formed the John Gardner Society. And the whole purpose was to raise awareness locally of John Gardner. I mean, he essentially is this area's best well-known author, and not merely author. He's had plays done, he's had operas done, incredibly dissertations in Sweden written about him. A book this last year by Sandy Nordahl, coming out of her experiences with Gardner and her reading of books by him. So he's really still, in death, long time ago, still very important in the literary world. Almost as important as Bill. Because Bill's a living voice. You need to remember, this is really cool. Anyway, John Gardner, let's go through some of the things he wrote. His very first book, 1966, The Resurrection. And the resurrection takes place in Batavia, New York. And the resurrection, this is when I found out that across from the School for the Blind, there used to be a baseball field designed for the blind. He talks about it in here. Is he even been lying? I don't know. But anyway, he does talk about that. And he talks about some specific houses. A music teacher that used to live on Oak Street describes the house. You could actually visualize which one it is if you read it. So Gardner, first one, but it's his first published. His first actual novel was his dissertation, University of Iowa's Writer's degree. So he had been interested in writing for a long time. So that was his first one. It wasn't very well received. It wasn't badly received, it just didn't do much. Then along came some really academic things, Jason and Medea, so if you have your Greek mythology, you can look back on that. But the thing that was really earth-shaking is the Sunlight Dialogue. haven't read Sunlight Dialogues, it's not an easy read. It's not something you just read. Say, it's quite the read. Okay. However, it does take place in Batavia, New York. There are more than 80 different characters in this book. Many of them seem to be based on locals, including the main character, Police Chief Plumley. And supposedly he was based on I think it was police chief at the time, or else the sheriff at the time in this area. He certainly lived on North Lyon Street, and he certainly used to have a post office, a little postal thing right outside of his house, okay? So he gives some identification. The Polka Dot Restaurant here in town, it was one of his favorite restaurants. When he'd come into town, he always ate there, had beef on wick all the time, okay? The other restaurant in town that he names in the book, Miss Batavia Diner, okay? So those were his two favorite spots, but it's in the book. First big seller, this was a New York Times bestseller, read all over the place, lots of discussion about it, academic circles, but even just regular people reading it. It's still in print. His first book isn't about that, but this one's still in print. Okay. After that, probably the next big one. No, I don't think.
I just have,
Oh,
I just have the copy of it.
yeah. Okay. Okay, I forgot. I loaned my copy of Grendel to somebody, so who knows who has it. Anyway, Grendel's his next big book, and that's also a big bestseller. It becomes something that college students everywhere have read. Anybody interested in medieval literature, actually Old English literature and tales, probably is familiar with it. It's not a difficult read, at least compared to some of the dialogues, but it's a great storyline, and it takes a look at the Beowulf, which is that brave Danish fighter who's going to kill the evil things, from the creature's point of view, and what's going on inside the creature's mind, and thoughts, impressions, etc. Ooh! We happen to have a copy right here on sale, right? Yeah, that. So, and it's still in print, obviously. Okay, this is still in print. So that was important. In fact, it was so important that, let's see, those of you that remember The Lion King, remember The Lion King was done on Broadway, and Julie Taymor was the director, using larger-than-life puppets and people and all sorts of things, right? She got a hold of Grendel. And in 2006, did the Grendel Opera. Okay, Broadway. So it's a lot. He's been dead since 1982. Okay, so this is ongoing with the importance. After that, he's written any number of novels. Yeah, but I want to try. Let's see. Jason and Medea, as I said. Oh yeah, two more. Nickel Mountain. When Gardner moved to a new place, Pennsylvania, why not make that my local place for writing? So Nickel Mountain, which is probably his single most accessible story. It's not deeply philosophical. It has, like all of his novels, incredible characters, and the character facing the personal dilemma of trying to be his best, which is very common in his books. Okay, so Nickel Mountain's next. After Nickel Mountain, though, comes my favorite. It's my favorite to read in October, and it's one that I loaned to God knows who, October Light.
I've got that too.
So, you know, if you haven't read it, it's a beautiful concept, and there are 3 pages in there that describe the light of October, when the sun is at the right spot, trees are in the right spot, rural spot, and it's the best description that captures what it's like in that. And a couple of the interesting things about the book. Once again, it's rural, not city-based. Takes place this time in Vermont. Why does he know Vermont? Because he used to teach summer workshops at the Bread Loaf Conference, Writers Conference. So he knew Vermont, lived there with his wife, Joan, and his family. And when he writes the book, evidently, to hear Joan tell it, she had a lot of input into this book. In fact, she did a presentation here in 1998 at the, thank you, it's October 11th. Still in print. She did a presentation here, books sandwiched in at the Richmond Library. It is on videotape. I don't know where they keep their old videotapes. Pardon?
They didn't have them in catalog.
They were at the college, because I know at one point they actually kept everything. Anyway, she talked about helping write certain parts of it. Some of those are her words in there. And it's a novel that has a trash novel within it. So there's the novel about a brother and sister, the broader novel, that's, you know, he ends up shooting the television, he's so angry about things. And I bet you we all have that feeling. Anyway, that's the broader novel. And then the novel with the trash novel that, you know, I don't remember who's reading it, but that's being read through. And so you get excerpts from that and excerpts and then it's back. So it's really a worthwhile read. These are probably the most accessible, though. The Grendel and October Light, great tales. After that, and Nickel Mountain. After that, the last major work was Mickelson's Ghost. And Mickelson's Ghost, by that time he's teaching in New York, so he, of course, is writing it as a New York-based book, professor, kind of on the outs with everything. So that's his last one, Mickelson's Ghost, 1982. Gardner died in a motorcycle accident in rural Pennsylvania. What is it, September 20-something, 1982. After he died, it kind of, that kind of faded as far as a lot of the attention. What we did find interesting is after he'd been writing these bestsellers, he decided to write a book about where he thinks fiction should go. And the book he wrote called On Moral Fiction. Yeah, I think you got that. On non-moral fiction, specifically named modern writers that he considered to be ultimately bad writers. And he named a lot of the big names. So he went after John Updike, he went after John Barth, mentioned Joan Didion. Okay. All these writers, for one reason or another, had gone astray. Okay. And on moral fiction, his underlying argument is that fiction should ultimately be moral. And that's what the critics jumped on, that idea of moral. What do you mean, right and wrong? As it turns out, his real definition of moral there is that it should ultimately show human beings at some point trying to do their best, trying to do their best. Okay? It may be just the one character there, it may be others. It is not didactic fiction. So if it's, I'm trying to make a point with all of this, it's not going to work. So that's primarily what he was arguing fiction should be. And he said the writer owes it to the reader. So the idea that you should get something more for yourself out of it should be not necessarily like you're going to go out and want to fly, but somewhat uplifting. The character has had redemption, so to speak, overcome things. Redemption was a major theme because, let's see, where did I put that? Let me read this one to you. This is by Henry Allen, a short piece. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning critic from the early 70s. Okay. Henry Allen. This is his beginning. When it happened 32 years ago, last April, this is written in 1977, everybody agreed John Gardner couldn't have stopped the tractor from killing his little brother Gilbert. His father said so, his mother said so, the uncles and aunts and neighbors up in Batavia, New York agreed. Even now, his mother insists that only God could have stopped that tractor, and he doesn't work that way. So when Gardner's short story, Redemption, this is a wonderful story, appeared in the Atlantic Monthly last June, some of his family and friends were surprised. Not surprised that he'd write about it. He'd been talking and brooding about it his whole life. And I want you to understand, brooding about it his whole life. It's been there, in the background, his whole life. Okay. The second sentence, however, nobody had known about this. So here's how it begins. One day in April, clear blue day when there were crocuses in bloom, Jack Hawthorne ran over and killed his brother, David. Even at the last moment, he could have prevented his brother's death by slamming on the tractor's brake, easily in reach for the shortness of his legs, but he was unable to think, or rather thought unclearly, and so watched it happen as he would again and again watch it happen in his mind with nearly undiminished clarity all his life. The younger brother was riding, as both of them knew he should not have been, on the cultipacker, a 2-ton implement lumbering behind the tractor, crushing new plowed ground. Jack was 12, his brother David 7. The scream came not from David, who never got out a word, but from their 5-year-old sister, who was riding on the fender of the tractor looking back. When Jack turned to look, the huge iron wheels had reached his brother's pelvis. He kept driving, reacting as he would to a half-crushed farm animal and imagining in the same stab of thought that perhaps his brother would survive. Blood poured from David's mouth. That lived with him for his whole life. That was, this is fictionalized account, but that's basically what happened. That was basically the age difference. He always felt that for whatever reason, because at the end of the interview he says, yes, I really believe I could have stopped. It would have been impossible. Everybody else is very aware it would have been impossible to stop. But that was the driving factor to the person. In 1977, he published, I don't have it with me, I'm for, yes I do, The Life and Times of Chaucer. Did you know Gardner was a medieval specialist? I forgot to mention that. He was a medievalist. He first taught at Oberlin College in 1962. He began writing articles around 1964, published on medieval topics. This was his specialty. And this was a book that came out in 1977. Filled with footnotes, endnotes, you know, the whole type of thing. But it's a very readable biography of Chaucer and of the times he lived in. So, in fact, it's one of the, I enjoyed it. It almost reads like a story, but it's just really brings so much of life back then and intrigue back then. It's really quite wonderful. However, because he overlooked a couple of footnotes that he should have placed in there. And remember, this is heavily footnoted and everything, but he overlooked a couple for people that he'd already made reference to. He was accused of plagiarism. Okay? And that ruined his whole experience. So, this book, however, has been written about many, many, many times. I mentioned Sandy Hjordahl being published several times, and this is one of her favorite books to go back to. Okay? Gardner not only was a novelist, not only was a medievalist, let's see, he wrote operas, Frankenstein, an opera. Perfect time of year, you should read it, we should be performing it, right? So Frankenstein, he did the libretto, okay? John Barber, Samuel Barber, somebody Barber did the music scores for it. He also wrote plays. In 1998, when we had our first Gardner celebration in Batavia, we actually did try to bring it back. They put on another one of his one-act plays, and this was Days of Vengeance. And it was for one person, and it was written for his mother. And in the original, Priscilla Gardner had her one-act play. And this was performed, and it was performed here. Once again, it was recorded. We have it. Mm-hmm. We actually have a recording. Anybody who wants to see it, or we're hoping to get it on DVD at some point, it's there. Okay? And so it's out there. He wrote that. He wrote Rumpelstiltskin, the opera, performed by the Philadelphia Opera Company. So, operas, plays, books of poetry. Where do we have Dragon? Oh, yeah. Children's stories. Dragon. And when my daughter was in 7th grade, it was in the middle school collection of stories they were to have read. However, it was censored because the world was crazy then, and he was writing about how things got crazy inside of this story, Dragon. And there were neighbors sleeping with neighbors' wives. Oh! And then I took that out. It was just too much for those 7th graders, I guess. It was So, anyway, children's stories. He had a child's bestiary that he had written. He was also a teacher. And if you look at the list of writers that he helped out and that owed debts to him, and still do, it's quite impressive. Even though he picked out Joan Didion in his On Moral Fiction, he was the first publisher in the nationally recognized journal in 1962. In the original MSS. I don't think that was out of Binghamton. I don't remember where that was out of. He published a number of writers. He loved to look for young, promising writers and made sure they were published. He loved to go to Bread Loaf, the Writers' Conference. One of our favorite members, Jan Quackenbush, who writes plays that are produced in Germany. Okay? And I think you can look him up on Internet Movie Database, and some places his name is there for some of the things he's done. Anyway, he talks about having worked with Gardner, that Gardner actually would stay up all night and make comments in marginalia, and then talk with the writer, come back. Anybody he thought was talented or had something, he wanted to help bring that out. And that's lifelong. Everything I can see over the years, that is an element that seems to always be that he wanted to nurture. Yeah.
I'm Jim Gardner.
Yeah.
One of his sayings was, "I will burn 1,000 years in hell for every writer I do not help."
No, he really, really was so committed to writers. And what I was so happy to see is still in publication, and I'm not kidding. This is kind of a How to Become a Good Writer by John Gardner. And it is still used in creative writing courses all over. It's currently in print. And it has invaluable exercises. So if you are interested in writing fiction, this is a good starting point. He also, How to Become a Novelist, I think that was the name of the other book. Do you remember, Bill?
Is it On Becoming a Novelist?
That's it, thank you.
Okay.
And it just was a wealth of trying to help writers. He really felt that was the important thing. Anyway, we've got a lot of things up here that have. Oh yeah, he's an artist. The college has a painting that was donated by Liz Rosenberg, his second wife, a poet who is also still writing for the Boston Globe. And she donated a painting he did called Death and the Maiden. And when I left the college, we made sure it was still put up, at least in the humanities area. They may not have it up there anymore, but it was a gift to the college. But he did paintings. And I think his first thing published was a cartoon, wasn't it? I think a cartoon when he was still in high school, may have been published in maybe the Atlantic, maybe the New Yorker, one of the national magazines. So he was a cartoonist. He liked Disney. He grew up here. When his father had a stroke and he was living in Binghamton, he would come up frequently by motorcycle, almost every weekend for a while, to help. Okay. This was a place he loved this place. He is described as an exception to most modern writing in that he is a pastoral writer. That's his strength. Writing about not the big cities, but smaller places, farms, etc. He actually rejected most New York-style writing as being really European and existential. And he grew up here, going to the First Presbyterian Church. And God was always a part of his life. He's fully felt that that was an important part of things. Didn't think he wasn't talking morality is good and evil. Morality is you're supposed to try to do your best. You're supposed to try to ultimately do something at your best, especially at a critical time. So we have what? Oh yes. Shot on his motorcycle as a kid. It was a family thing. His dad built for your Aunt Priscilla and your mother with a sidecar, homemade sidecar.
Well, it was a three-wheel motorcycle. It took what started out being put out by a snowmobile company that made, but it was 200 powered, so he took a Volkswagen and set the motorcycle thing on a Volkswagen frame.
So the motorcycles were in the family. Okay. Let's see. He went to the Alexander schools for most of his life, and then around 12th grade he transferred. Was it 12th grade senior year? Transferred to Batavia High School. Graduated 1951 from Batavia High School because of, was it the chemistry teacher or was it the English teacher?
The principal, A. Warren Dayton, said, we cannot offer you what you need here. You need to transfer to Batavia. And because it was for something that Alexander did not offer, he was able to get in tuition free.
Yeah, and he grew up, the house is on Creek Road.
Yeah. Oh, it's on Putnam Road.
Putnam, yeah.
Just
So,
about a quarter mile.
The numeric address of that, Putnam Road. This is the old homestead?
Yeah. No, it was. I can't remember the first part of it. I'm sorry.
That old farmhouse, probably?
Yeah, it's a brick. Well, matter of fact, around here somewhere, there's a book of the Centennial Estates. It was a Walter Cole estate, and it was pictured in 1876 in a book that they have here.
It's a brick.
It's big brick mansion.
Yeah, it is.
Stately,
It's called,
very-
oh, it's called the Gardner Mansion
Yeah.
in Alexander, because I'm from Alexander, so, yeah. Beautiful house. It's still there, yes.
Yes, it's still there, and Baskin bought it, who's got enough money to upkeep it. I couldn't.
I think it's being remodeled.
Yeah,
Dan
it's.
Kelsey, I think, is remodeled.
Took off the garage, it was falling down and put a hammer roof garage on there, so it's still maintaining its.
It was a beautiful old house.
There ought to be an historical marker in front, don't you think?
Yeah, we talked about having a thing, marker, and that we gave permission for it to done.
we had hoped at one point to have a nice sign,
Yeah,
welcome to Batavia, birthplace of John Gardner, right? We worked to get money for that. It's now a bench in front of the polka dot.
Yes.
Because when we went to the city of Batavia, they said, that's not within our vision. However, it's within the vision of the town of Batavia.
okay, I got the numbers 9645, I'm sorry, 9645. I couldn't figure out the first two numbers.
Now, in 1985, it wasn't called Go Art then, but I think, whatever the 85 name of it was, they put on a production of his where did we have the shoemaker? Oh, yeah. The the Sam Weber's Toy Shop Miracle. Remember, this is about 3 years after he died. But this was written before he died. This was written with Liz Rosenberg, his second wife. And John raised as a Presbyterian, and Liz Jewish. And this was a nice attempt to kind of bring two traditions together in the form of a nice little story. But that was put on here in Batavia.
If somebody wants
And if
those,
you want,
these are extra.
we have some extra copies of this, okay? Let's see, I think that's pretty much the general things I wanted to
The
say.
only thing you have left is the license plate.
Oh. Yeah. And
It's under one of those, under the yellow.
thank you. This is his final license plate. This is from the motorcycle he was riding. Initially, I believe there was some rumor about him maybe being suicidal at that point, that maybe he purposely didn't take the turn. The road wasn't good. There was probably, he was very excellent motorcycle rider. However, he had a lot to look forward to. He was going to marry Susan Thornton 2 days.
The following weekend.
Yeah. It was a tragic way to die. He had colon cancer in 1977. That's the year that the IRS came after him. Joan had left him. That marriage broke up. That was when the critics really came after him for his immoral fiction. And he went through that. He made it through. Anyway, John Gardner, we do really hope to continue. Bill, can I say anything, or could you say anything about any readings that we?
Well, for years we did a reading from Gardner's works every Saturday night, every October. Did it. The first one was the Holland Land Office, and then we kind of moved around various coffee shops, and they would close, and
Yeah, they would close the night before we got there.
yeah, a couple times. Then we did Polka Dot for about 15 years, and COVID, they reconfigured the interior, so it really wasn't possible to do that anymore. So we've been just doing it at a private house the last couple of years, so we'll probably do it in late October. If anyone's interested, they can ask me, and I'll tell them what we'll do it.
It's always an exciting time because you have people bringing their favorite Gardner passage to read.
Yeah, we have people come from Indiana,
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, other places, yeah.
Yeah, so it's worthwhile. So any questions we can answer, or any, and Jim is a great resource, I might add, having grown up with that household.
Why was Resurrection not well received? No?
It's first novel, and I don't think it wasn't. Critics didn't
Want me to
hate
speak
it.
to that a little bit?
Yeah.
When my brother started his writing, he had a bunch of things he wanted to get out to show his what he felt about things. So he wrote The Resurrection was a philosopher who was terminally ill. And so he goes into the heavy philosophy of that person, and it was a very heavy read. Unless you were into it, it wasn't. And then that didn't quite cover all the philosophy, so his next one was The Wreckage of Agathon, which was an old philosopher in Greece who sat with his feet in the sewer blowing onion farts. So it was kind of a totally different. So those two things he had to get out of his way before he came up with Sunlight Dialogues, which was his third one.
And The Wreckage of Agathon is a published book also?
Yeah, I don't think it's in print now unless you can find it in a library or something.
I know through the Nioga system you can find it.
Okay.
And they have Resurrection you can get through the Nioga system as well. As a resident of the state of New York, did you know you could all get New York City Public Library cards for free? Which means any of their things they have digitally available, you can go ahead and borrow. But you gotta get the library card, you gotta let them, I can't remember how I did it, but it really opens up things. So if you got the Nioga system, but you got that one too.
One of the other things that, one of the few things that didn't get ever published, he wrote as a 14-year-old kid, and that was a poem. Some folks swear when the cows get out and won't get back, too dumb to. Though you chase them and beat them and shout, around the farm they will run you. Now I don't believe in my beating my stock. Myself I'd not want it done to. And as for uttering unpleasant vows is something that no one should come to. I never beat or curse my stock, for cows need tolerance from you. I never swear or beat them, at least never as often as some do. I missed 2 words on that, but no. Yeah, that was a 14-year-old kid.
Can I pose this question? I'm assuming that books were valued and reading was promoted by your parents. Is that true, or did he just?
Okay, my mother and father were the scandal of Batavia back in 29. Mom came to teach in Batavia as her first school coming out of Albany State Teachers, that's what it was called then. And there was a sophomore in school named John Gardner. And she never had him for a course, but she taught public speaking and directed plays, of which Dad was in all of those. And so my father had an older brother, and my mother had a younger sister, so they'd go to the square dances, and my uncle would pick up my mother, and my father would pick up her sister, and they'd go to the square dances, so publicly he wasn't with his teacher, and then after they got in the car, they'd switch. So they waited till a year after Dad graduated, they got married, and people said, well, minus 5 years. So it wasn't really a secret. When Dad was in the track team, he was pole vaulter, the other guys would rib him, say, now, you better do a good job, Miss Jones is watching. So it wasn't held too good a secret, at least among the kids. They knew that there was a connection there. And Dad just, well, the reason, Dad didn't like frivolous girls. He wanted somebody with some maturity, and he was big on literature. And this was the two things. When after they got married, and Batavia Players was considered the best amateur theater group in all of Western New York. Buffalo couldn't touch it. Mom was directing the plays, and Dad was the lead in a lot of them. So that, and he did Shakespeare plays too. I mean, so yeah, that whole thing of literature and poetry was something that and I called him Bud because Dad was John and my brother was John, so they always called. When he was little, he was Buddy, and then when he was older, he was Bud to the family. So if you hear me talk about Bud, that's just because that's what I call him. So yeah, the literature started early, and when he wrote, every time he wrote a book, before he had it published, he sent the manuscript to Mom to go over it. And she says, I can't write anything like this, and he's asking me to critique it. And one of the things he ran into, after Sunlight Dialects and some Grendel and some books that really did well, he was talking to me one time. He says, Jim, you know, I write really good stuff, and these cheap sex novels are outselling me. I am going to write the greatest dirty book that has ever been written. And he wrote October Light, where the book within the book is one of these sex novels that she's reading to occupy her time as she's hiding in the attic from her brother. So that was, and Mom, she's, there was words she wouldn't say if she had a mouthful, you know that line. Anyway, Mom was pretty proper, and she read that, and she said, no, I don't, it's great, but I don't like it. No, I don't, and she just could not figure out how to address it, because it was so good against her moral standards, but it was such fantastic writing, and she was, so that was funny, okay.
And she was a school teacher.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, she was, well,
Well, thank you.
yeah.
But your dad was a lay minister at the Presbyterian Church.
Yep.
And I know that in an interview he did with Stephen Huff, who was also a writer from Alexander, that he says that he was able to visit a number of times at the home and always missed meeting John, but he said that your dad had 4 hours of poetry.
It was actually 6.
6?
6 hours of poetry and scripture. He thought he was going to go blind. He had, his right eye was 20/40 as corrected. And so whenever he saw something he liked, he memorized it because he was afraid he wouldn't be able to read it later. And so Mom would give him the first lines, and he could go for 6 hours straight. And in there was the entire book of Ruth. He could quote you the book. And he also, because of his acting, he did not preach a sermon, he delivered a sermon.
Yeah.
He never raised his voice, and nobody ever missed a word. He had this powerful voice that came out and enunciated, and was when all your plays, they didn't have them mic'd up, so you had to be able to hear a whisper completely across, and he had that projection strength. And he would spend 3 to 4 months writing a sermon. And in that sermon, he would mix in scripture, poetry, and his transitions, which were Shakespearean worthy, so that it was a symphony of words. And so there was 27 different churches that he would fill in every once in a while when the minister was on vacation or something. And Mom would keep track of what church or what sermon, so he never used the same sermon. But like I said, he could only come up with 3 or 4 sermons a year. But the cows heard those sermons at least 300 times before a human ever heard it. So we had the most religious cows in the
Any of you who might want to get an idea of what he sounded like, what he looked like, there are a number of YouTube videos that are available. His son, Joel, did a full-length documentary that you can see parts of that on YouTube. He was on the Dick Cavett show, someplace. Dick Cavett attacked him for moral fiction. John did a great job saving it. But you can find some videos of that. There are videos, once again, that you have in the town of John. That came from TV shows. He was often on anything where they would interview famous writers of the time. And you can find other people who knew him very well talking about him. So you just do a YouTube look. He's John C. Gardner, John Champlin.
And this is my fiance. This is the future sister-in-law of John Gardner. Anyway, but we have that prayer circle at Manor House, so that was a non-box. But on the moral fiction, I always refer to that as his charge of the Light Brigade. It was something he felt he had to do, and he wanted authors to take more responsibility in their writing to keep it more meaty and honest. And so he used like 10 different authors that were top authors. He said, I didn't pick on anybody that couldn't, would be hurt by it. But when he would find little faults of these different 10 authors that he thought this is where they could have made their craft even better, the publisher said, wait a second, well, I got 10 incomes or I got 1 income. And so after he wrote that, he had a hell of a time getting anybody to publish his books because he had criticized the great authors. And now that is used in colleges as this is something really important that you need to know for if you're going to go into serious writing. So, yeah.
Well, as the town of Batavia historian, I get the Heritage magazine. I have submitted 9 of John's poems and drawings. If it's going to be put in there, I don't know when, but I did submit that to the Heritage magazine.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Bernita's also requested if everybody could please just sign your name, and if you'd like to...
If you want to be contacted when you guys have a get-together, let me know and I can give it to you.
Sure.
Whatever. Put your email down too if you have it.
Cool. Well, the other thing I always loved was he got a letter from some, I think they were 11th grade students at Alexander, from Mrs. Shank's class.
Oh, could be.
Yeah, okay. And he wrote us, and they were critiquing or giving their insights into Grendel. He wrote a 6-page letter to those students. And we have it someplace. So please feel free. What Bernida has collected is really a treasury. And the other place you can find a lot is the University of Rochester's special collection has his papers. And they have cataloged his papers. So that's another very good place to look.
Another note on my brother. The only good drunks I was deputy in competitive drinking and things. We did that kind of world, but the only good drunks I ever had was with my brother, and I'd go to his house, and we'd sit up all night talking about what, and we'd just go through one bottle after another, and we'd curse and then hug and tell each other how much we loved it, and then we'd argue with each other, and then we'd crawl off to bed, and 3 hours later, I'd hear his typewriter going full blast. It was just,
Well, the town of Batavia is looking for a new home for me as the history department, and it will be out near the fairground. And once I'm settled, which will probably be next year, all of this is available to whoever needs to come and see it. Even I'm over off of Federal Drive right now. Again, if you want to come in, I'm in the phone book. Just call Town of Batavia and ask for Bernida. They know who I am, and direct you to my office and help you with whatever you need to see. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, if you ever want to see what he was writing like when he was a chemistry major at DePaul University, so this is his journal from his first year there. Gives an insight into a very, very young writer. And he left DePaul and ended up at George Washington.
Washington University in St. Louis.
Yeah, Washington University in St. Louis, where
That's because he married Joan who lived in St. Louis.
moved that direction, headed towards literature, and eventually University of Iowa's right.
And one of the things that he majored in Old English because he wanted to be a writer. And the schools thought that that was so difficult that they shouldn't give the Old English teacher as many classes. So he'd get like 4 classes where everybody else had 12 classes a week. And that gave him all that extra time to write, but he was getting a full salary because he was teaching Old English. He planned that before he got his PhD, which he got his PhD at age 25 and from Iowa, and he was almost totally gray, but he was staying up 36 hours at a time and having living on nothing but coffee with 5 teaspoons of sugar in the black coffee. So it was, his food was the sugar and his, and Joan one time after about 3 or 4 days, she walked into his den totally naked and said, "John, man cannot live by bread alone." He got the hint. I'm supposed to stop. I'm supposed to stop and be a husband now.
Well, anyway, thank you. If you have another question? Thank you all for coming.
Great job.
Well, thank you, Bernida and Charlie and Jim and Bill, for everybody for sharing those stories, because I think we all learned quite a bit today. Just a quick PSA about everything coming up. Tomorrow night, Halloween season kicks off here at the Land Office Museum. So Connie Boyd will be here doing the West Side Batavia Ghost stories. And then every Friday after that will be our ghost walks. So we're filling up rather fast for that. So if you're still interested, there's still spots. We're doing them at 7 and 7:30 because we've had such a request. And then Saturday, October 14th, we're doing the return of our Murder Mystery Dinner Theater, which will be at 6 p.m. that night at the Batavia Country Club. We have Western New York Improv. They're an improv group from Buffalo that comes in, and they will be doing it's called Murderous Affair, the truest story of the murder of Johnson Lynch. For anybody who is a local history nut, we know that Johnson Lynch was killed by Ian Rao. So it is a story based around that altercation. So tickets are $75 and there is a choice of meals. If you're interested, give me a call at the museum and we'll be happy to get you signed up for that. So, thank you again, everybody. There are still some donuts and coffee if anybody wants any. Help yourself. And we'll see you at the next event. Oh, and the next Java with Joe, I should say, Tyler, our curator, will be presenting. It'll be sort of the ending of our cemetery exhibit, the October 28th, and he will be doing on Victorian mourning practices. So it'll be quite an interesting talk, so we hope to see you then. And you can check everything out on our website, Facebook page, our email blasts if you get those. If you don't get those and want to, let me know and I can put you on the list for that. And we'll see you at the next one.
And if you want to hear more of Brian, listen to WBTA's Do You Remember These? He will be on in October at one of our, I don't remember what date, but yeah, sometime in October. So, check it out. It gives you a lot of information for upcoming programs, etc.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Cool.